Biz Communication Show. I'm Bill Lampton, your host every week on both video and podcast. As you know, all of us need very strong communication skills to succeed in business. And that's why every week I bring in a top communication expert and spend 20 minutes with them, asking them to share their expertise with us. And of course, this will help you benefit in many ways: your sales, your marketing, your management, your morale, your company's image, and definitely your profits. Today's guest is Bob Littell. Several years ago, I spoke at a meeting in Atlanta. The group is ExecuNet. I was invited there by a very prominent banker, businessman, philanthropist, Mike Banks. On the way back from the speech, Mike asked me, he said, "We've been networking this morning. Have you heard of NetWeaving?" I said, "No, what's NetWeaving?" He said, "Well, then you need to get to know Bob Littell, because he is absolutely the chief NetWeaver," as he refers to himself. Okay, so I thought that was very interesting. I gave Bob Littell a call. Not surprisingly, he was very receptive. He invited me to a coffee, get acquainted meeting, and began to explain to me what he will explain today as we discuss it. So I'm very happy now to bring to our view and to our listening, Bob Littell. Hello, Bob.
Hi, Bill. How are you today?
I'm great and very happy to have you join us. And I still remember so well how excited I was to meet you and how much I appreciated your hospitality when you invited me to the Buckhead Club for coffee and conversation. And we've had a great friendship and learned a few things about communication from each other since then.
We certainly have.
Bob, most of our professional viewers would be familiar with networking, and they do it, and they try different facets of it. But explain to us, please, what NetWeaving is, because there are people who might have heard of the term, or maybe they haven't. But you've championed NetWeaving. What is that exactly, please?
Well, Bill, I, like a number of other people, had mixed feelings about what I would refer to as traditional networking. And I think almost anyone can identify with being in a room with a great number of other people and having a nice eyeball-to-eyeball conversation until they decide you are not the perfect prospect for them right then and there. And so instead of the direct eye contact, all of a sudden they're nodding their head, but kind of looking over your left shoulder, your right shoulder, as they're finding their next landing spot.
We've all had that happen to us, yes.
Yes. And once again, let me emphasize, NetWeaving is not an attack on networking. To be successful, you have to do both. But what I found is that focusing on NetWeaving rather than networking will in the long run have far greater results and will also be far more pleasing to you when you're anticipating going to that next networking event. Now, there's a second weakness, and this can be true for NetWeaving as well as networking, and that is a lack of follow-up. And also what I add is follow through, and later on we'll distinguish between the two. But for now, people go to these meetings, they exchange, maybe collect 5, 10, 15 business cards. They go home, and usually they don't do anything that evening. And the next morning, they get caught up in their daily routine. They go to the office. They don't look back at these business cards, and a day goes by, 2 days, a week, and they come across these business cards, and not only can they not remember what they talked about, they can't remember what the other person looked like, let alone what was the discussion.
So really, in that case, nothing particular happens, right?
Yeah, nothing happens. That's exactly right. So those are what I call the two primary reasons why, without necessarily at the beginning actually realizing what I was doing when I was creating NetWeaving, it was more of a reaction to my dislike for, quote, traditional networking.
So then how does net weaving work? I know Mike Banks said to me that he asked me if I had seen the movie Pay It Forward, and I had not. And he said, well, when Bob Littell talks with you, you'll find out there's a similarity between that movie and what Bob advocates as far as cultivating relationships.
Well, you're exactly right. And first, the basis of NetWeaving involves learning how to get better, or just learning how to uh, achieve three skill sets. The first one is learning how to become or be a better connector of other people with their needs, problems, opportunity in mind, rather than just your own. The second skill set is learning how to position yourself as a gratuitous resource provider for others so that you develop a reputation as the go-to person. You get called when it has nothing to do with your own profession or communication or whatever. They call up and say, Bill, you know, I know this has nothing to do with what you do, but gosh, you've got such an incredible network. I'm trying to do an extension to my garage. Do you happen to know anyone in the construction business that might be a good referral? And so that's the second skill set, is learning how to be a gratuitous resource and provider for others. The third skill set, and it ties into the first two very closely, and that is constantly being on the lookout for individuals who are exceptional at what they do, regardless of their field. So instead of sticking with people just in your own business, you're consistently trying to meet people who are exceptional at whatever it is, their field, their line of work, their professions, whatever. And first, you have to find a way to help them. And then after you've developed trust, developed a relationship with them, you make them part of what we call your trusted resource network, so that it ties in with the first two, in that now you're constantly thinking of people within that trusted resource network who you could connect for their benefit, not yours, and that they would be ones who have skills and have information and can share that same give first in order to receive kind of mentality.
You know, one of the questions that might come to mind would be, well, what's in it for me? That's a very common phrase, and it's a very common approach. Let's say, Bob, that I find two people who I think would have great synergy together. And as you say, they may be in the same profession, they may be in related professions, or they may be in quite distinctive professions. So I call these people and I say, I'll host you for lunch at the 1818 Club. Let's meet. I'd like the two of you to get together. Okay, I have driven to the Gwinnett area. I've taken half a day. I've paid for a meal maybe, and in a way that's an investment of time and money and my own expertise and influence. So what do I get as the net weaver? What's my return on this? We always talk about return on investment.
Well, I've written 3 books, Bill, on the concept of net weaving. The first one, Power Net Weaving, was just pretty much all about the skill sets and also people who had been doing net weaving literally without having a word for it. The second one was called The Heart and Art of Net Weaving. And in there, I identified the heart of net weaving is that it's not only something that you like doing, But the pay it forward form of net weaving is that you have confidence, utter confidence in the belief that what goes around does come back around. The third book, though, was very much in line with what you just asked. The third one was called Raising Your R&R Factor, How Referable and Recommendable Are You? Because now I'd been out on the speaking circuit for a couple of years on the concept. And I would have some individuals come up to me and very sheepishly say, Bob, love the concept of net weaving, but frankly, I just have to tell you, I've done a lot of it and I just don't see much, if anything, coming back around to benefit me. So finally, after hearing this often enough, I started asking 3 different questions. How are you doing it? Who are you doing it for? And what are you doing in the way of following up after you've made a connection or you've done some gratuitous act of kindness? And what I was finding out in almost all cases, how they were doing it, they were tying some kind of string to what they were doing. Oh, Bill, gosh, I'm so glad I was able to help you. And gosh, if you ever think of someone else that might be able to benefit, me, gosh, that would be great if you could refer them back to me.
So the
once again,
NetWeaving disappears.
Yeah. Well, once again, NetWeaving isn't an attack on networking, but you can't mix the two. When you're NetWeaving, you're purely looking out for the other person's needs. So that was the first thing I found. The second one, and this is probably the most common, and especially people who are more generous get taken advantage of, because it is true, the world is made up of givers and takers. And what I've found, unfortunately, and I've been fooled by some great disguised net weavers, that when you net weave for a taker, they will take and take and take. I kiddingly say they're missing the reciprocity gene. They just don't get it that, oh, I'm supposed to now do something nice for you. But the third reason is also very, very common. And that is when you make a connection for someone else, and especially if it's a high-level connection, we have a human flaw that we tend to take ownership of the new relationship. And the saying, we forgot the girl that brought us to the dance? I have many stories of where I've made connections for someone and then followed back up a month, 2 months, 3 months later and said, gee, whatever happened, Bill, that introduction that I made with you and XYZ? And you said, oh my gosh, Bob, I forgot. You were the one that introduced me. Well, Joe introduced me to Mary. Mary turned around, introduced me to Sally. Sally's now one of my biggest clients. Gosh, I've got to find a way to help you. So those were 3 reasons that if you don't follow, in other words, how you net weave, who you net weave for, and givers and takers pretty much show their colors. And the third one, of course, is you have to follow up a week, 2 weeks, a month later, and find out how did everything go. So incidentally, there was a 4th category. And the 4th category were people that were doing all 3 right, but nothing was coming back around. And guess what? I had to tell them, listen, the law of reciprocity, of referral reciprocity, is irrefutable. And if it's not coming back around, you need to look in the mirror. Because what is a referral or a recommendation? It's a risk on the part of the person making it. And if they do not see enough, whether it's integrity, whether or not it's skills, whether or not it's confidence, they're not going to risk their reputation. And I've had some very hard conversations with some folks, because I truly believe that the law is irrefutable. If you do it right, do it with the right people, and you do follow up to make sure that you at least get credit for connections that you make. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I do want to have you share with our viewers and listeners what you told our book club, not at the most recent meeting, but at the one before that. We were talking, of course, about net weaving, and you gave a specific instance, and I'm sure there are many, but you gave one where you introduced two people and something eventually came back pretty important and significant for you.
It's an amazing.
Yes. What was that?
It's an amazing story, and believe it, just as I say, every act of net weaving creates a set of ongoing ripples. So the story isn't over yet. At the Buckhead Club, I met this fella who incidentally was a networker and not a net weaver. And he said, gee, I've found this company that is a big data company, and I think we could land a consulting gig with them, and let's try and see if we can find some way to get in touch with the CEO and see if we can just find a way to get their business. It wasn't, let's do a lot of research and let's find a way that we could help them. So I ended up meeting the CEO, but I got so interested in what they were doing with big data that I actually said, could I interview you, because I've got some good contacts at the Atlanta Business Chronicle. And there's a thing called the Max Award, which is an award given by Georgia State and the Atlanta Business Chronicle. And I'd like to interview you and then help you fill out the nomination form. Well, we did it. And guess what? They were the runner-up winner their first year in business. So now we've developed a relationship, and I'm good friends with the CEO. Well, just maybe a month or two later, a good friend of mine, believe it or not, had cancer, and I went to a fundraiser, and I decided that I was going to donate $500, and I put $250 on a 2-hour fly fishing lesson and $250 to have lunch with Glenn Lurie, who at the time was head of emerging innovations at AT&T. Well, through an organization that we have, CEO NetWeavers, I had met Ralph de la Vega, who was the CEO. He's since retired of AT&T Mobility. And so I said, well, gee, I know Ralph already. I'm going to bid on a lunch with Glenn Lurie. Well, I won that one too. So as I got to know and had this lunch with Glenn Lurie and was telling him about this big data company, he said, well, gee, I'd love to meet him. So I thought it was going to be a one-on-one meeting. We have this meeting with the CEO of this company, and he brings 4 other people, you know, the technicians to the meeting as well. And guess what? AT&T became their first client. Well, it wasn't more than about 6 months later, without ever asking for it, that a stock certificate showed up. So there's what goes around comes around. But here's the next question, or the next ripple. About 6 months or maybe even a year later, I get a call from him. And he said, Bob, I know you've got this incredible network, but you don't know by any chance Fred Reichheld, do you? I said, you want to hear a small world story? I have the Don't Need to Read the Book Club. And wouldn't you know that one of the books that I summarized with author's permission was the Ultimate Question 2.0. And the ultimate question that you see on every customer survey is, how likely is it that you would recommend or refer this individual to someone you know? And guess what? That was written by Fred Reichheld, who had been a professor at Harvard and wrote this book on that question. and eventually developed something that's used by many, many of the Fortune 50 companies called the Net Promoter Score. So he wanted to meet Fred Reichheld to see if their big data machine might fit in well with Fred Reichheld. And the ultimate question, well, Fred Reichheld had then become a consultant with Bain, one of the large consulting companies. And guess what? Made that connection with Fred Reichheld and the CEO of this other company. And guess what? Today, they've now verged that technology into Bain. So that's the latest ripple, Bill, but I'm sure it's not over yet.
Fascinating. And as you and I know, that doesn't happen every time, but there's the possibility it can. And yet, I think what we want to bring together here is that if nothing specific happens, there's still a great satisfaction in getting competent, personable, open, professional people together. I want to read a couple of statements of yours that I've jotted down during our meetings. You're well known for them. Good things happen to people who make good things happen. And then this one, I think, characterizes you and characterizes NetWeaving perfectly. When you open the door for someone else, you never know who you will meet as a result.
You know, Bill, the one part that I didn't directly answer to you is the pay it forward aspect of NetWeaving. And to do that, you have to understand that there are 4 levels of NetWeaving. And these, it's very important for people that are just getting into NetWeaving to remember. The first level is you and I are at a meeting and I'm just using my mental Rolodex. And I say, Bill, you know, I just thought of somebody who you'd really benefit meeting. I'll tell you what, I'm going to email you their contact information, give them a call, tell them I told you to call them. So level 1, all I'm doing is I'm leaving all the work up to you and I'm simply lending my reputation to you. The second level of NetWeaving might be where I say, I'll tell you what, Bill, send me your bio and some information on your company, and I'll send those on to my friend with an introduction so that he'll have a little information about you as well. Okay, so the second level is I'm adding a little bit of my own piece to it. And the third level is the same as level 2, but now I say, in fact, I'll tell you what, Bill, let me see if I can get John on the phone right now, and let me make a telephone introduction in addition to the information that I'll send him. But the fourth level, and this is the one you mentioned in your example, is where I physically host a meeting. I pick 2 people who I think will benefit meeting each other. It's important to send their information about each other or check and see if their LinkedIn profile is current. Part of it is just common courtesy, but the higher up you go in NetWeaving, the level of people that you're connecting, the more important that is to make sure that the timing is okay for the 2 of them to get together. Because once again, they may not want to let you down, but this is not really a good time for them right now. So the hosting meeting of NetWeaving, what I was finding at the end of a meeting where you're introducing the 2, you're facilitating the meeting to help them find ways to help each other, discover people they know in common. What I was finding at the very beginning of NetWeaving, that in about 80 to 90% of the cases, at the end or towards the end of that meeting, they'd turn the table on me and say, Bill, this has been great, but how can we help you? And initially I was saying, well, why don't you just Pianto? And they'd look at me really funny and I'd say, yeah, you pass it on to 2 others. Well, people kept coming out to me after one of my meetings, one of my speeches, and saying, haven't you seen the movie Pay It Forward? Because the movie came out just about the same time that I came up with the word NetWeaving. And so I bought and watched the movie. Then I bought the book that the movie was based on. And I ended up calling the author, Catherine Ryan Hyde, out in California. And over about a 2-year period, as I was building more trust and confidence, she invited me to not only join the board, but I then became the first elected president of the Pay It Forward Foundation. And that's how, with her permission, NetWeaving is now known globally as the business version of Pay It Forward.
Bob, this has been an excellent overview and summary, and you've given some specific illustrations which help us understand NetWeaving. I'm quite sure that both our viewers and our listeners will want to know your contact information. And before you do that, before you give the contact information, tell us, please, are your books available on Amazon?
They aren't available on Amazon yet. And the reason is the second book, The Heart and Art of NetWeaving, for over 10 years, by virtue of me helping, this is another, how did it come back around? I helped a wonderful story. This is beautiful on Memorial Day. I wish I could had time to tell the whole thing. But by helping this woman who'd actually been an officer in the Army under General Norman Schwarzkopf. And as a result of having taken her story around the world, she was an executive with Xerox, and Xerox printed the book for over 10 years. So all $20 from the sale went to charity. I'm in the process of rebuilding the NetWeaving website where all the books will be available, as well as a course that I'll be launching online on NetWeaving later on in the fall.
Excellent.
And
well,
once again,
please let me know when that's available, and I'll be happy to circulate that information. Again, now we need, please, your contact information.
It's chiefnetweaver@gmail.com. And that's the easy way to get in touch with me. And I do return all emails.
Chief NetWeaver.
Bill, listen, let me just...
Yes, go ahead, Bob.
Let me just thank you. This is, I have to compliment you. Your questions, and I've done, I don't know how many, probably dozens or maybe 100. You had some very interesting questions that helped me pull out elements of NetWeaving that I don't normally cover in a podcast. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And you're a very interesting guy with a wonderful concept that has helped many business and professional people and will continue to do so. Now that Bob has given his contact information, I'm very happy to offer mine. I identified at the start of the program as the Biz Communication Guy. So appropriately, my website is Biz, that's B-I-Z, bizcommunicationguy.com. Invite you to visit my website, and there you can sign up for my newsletter, which will bring you frequent tips and strategies, which will be very useful for you in your business. I thank all of you for being with us today. Certainly, Bob Littell, many thanks to you, and we look forward to another stimulating guest and helpful conversation next week.